Thanks for tuning in to Product Chats. On today's episode, I talk with Matt Peters, who is the Chief Product Officer at Expel, and we talk about operational metrics and people enabled by products. So hope you enjoy the show, and don't forget to leave us a review. Hey, Matt, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, in a minute or less, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I'm Matt Peters. I'm the Chief Product Officer at a company called Expel. We are a managed detection and response provider, which basically means we help customers by watching their infrastructure for attackers and like cyber criminals and things like this. As the Chief Product Officer there, I run the team that is responsible for product strategy, our roadmap, also the engineering team that builds the product that we use, and the operations team that does the security monitoring and things like that. I've been there for about 5.5 years and been doing this class of work for about 25.
Let's talk about that 25 years and how you actually got into product and what that journey has looked like.
Sure. So I got a degree in engineering and went into software development, and I did software development for a big chunk of my career. During that time, I ended up becoming sort of like an architect on one of my products, and then gradually got into sort of like leadership positions. And the thing that I learned over the course of the first sort of 10 years of my career is I would, build software and that'd be awesome. But then I got to see into other parts of the process. So I got to see how sales engineering went. I got to see how training went. I got to see how, like QA and things like this went. Everything I got to see was really, really interesting. And I realized that good, solid software, good, solid product development was a necessary but not a sufficient condition for success of a product. And so over time, I got more and more interested in like all of the different aspects of this thing. So then the job that really sort of flipped it for me was when I went to Mandiant, which then got subsequently acquired by FireEye. And there we were doing a very similar thing, sort of a managed service, a sort of security service. And we had a product, but we also had a very strong service component. And we were going international and doing a lot of expansion and growth and things like this. I really got to see how, when particularly going international, hit a market and you think you have a solution. You've got all this great engineering and you have all this great service. And then like it kind of bounces off the hull and you're like, wait, what? And then realizing, oh, actually that market, they don't want that. They want it like this. And so really thinking about the customer and things like this. So, fast forward to my next job was Expel. And as I took over the product organization, really spent a lot of time with some very talented people, including very talented UX people who think a lot about customer interviews and things like this, talented product managers, but trying to spend a lot of time thinking about customers. So that's sort of like my gradual transformation from engineering, where I was largely thinking about like the coolest technical way to solve a problem, to product management, where I'm largely thinking about, okay, so what does the customer what do they really want? How do we do that as a thing?
So on that subject of listening to your customer, right? What are some of your favorite frameworks or things you always do to make sure that you're actually listening to your customer, their needs, rather than building out a product and you say, oops, our market doesn't want this?
Sure. So it's a great question. So first off, to start with, when you're starting with an existing product, so one of the things that we've been in business for about 5 years, so we have a product that we use, we actually have instrumented, we have a ton of metrics that we're watching what customers actually do with it, right? Because it's one thing to have a customer tell you they want something. It's another thing to like interview them and really tap on it and that kind of thing. Okay, fine. There's a whole nother framework of like, hey, if I can actually see what they're doing to inform those decisions, it's hugely powerful. The other thing that we do is we do a tremendous amount of like exploratory research, which includes a combination of customer interviews where you'll go out and say like, okay, like tell me about the class of problems you're dealing with right now, like just like an iSearch open-ended research kind of thing. We do a lot of guided, we'll show you a UX or user experience and then like have you describe it to us. And this is actually a thing that I've discovered is kind of powerful, is if you show up with your thing and rather than telling people, oh, this is my thing and this is how it works and this kind of thing, if you just show it to me like, what do you think it does? It's fascinating because people like that will tell you whether your thing is intuitive or not, or this kind of stuff. Then one of the other things that we've done in a framework or a utility that I would always encourage people to use is like the go-to-market engine is a huge and powerful way to learn about what your customer wants, right? Talking to the sales team, and you have to filter that. You cannot just build whatever sales wants, but talking to your sales team. And then once you have customers who are saying, okay, well, I'm really interested in this feature, a release process that gives you the space and the time to say, okay, we're going to build a first version of this and try it with a couple of test customers and really pair with them, see what they did, see what roadblocks they came into and that kind of stuff. So those are sort of the kind of the big phases. There's a bunch of tools that we use that like, are particularly, productive. I mean, we use all the standard, mock-up tools and things like this. We actually also end up using, when we're doing prototyping and stuff like this, we actually end up sometimes just writing the thing for real and then being like, yeah, what does it look like? So that's a lot of the stuff that we tend to do.
So I think something you talked about, right, was the success of the product And let's talk into operational metrics.
So one of the things that we believe really strongly in, and actually there's some really good research and writings on this, but we believe really strongly in measuring things to understand what's really going on, right? Now, the way that I think about this, and actually there's a thing on Spotify talks about this DIB framework, like, data, insight, belief, bet, right? And that's a sort of a feedback loop that you can have, but it starts with data. It starts with something that you can see. That data might be a user interview or a collection of user interviews. It might be, something like that. It might be, metrics or numbers and things like this. What we do is we try to steer each one of our teams. Like we have a team that focuses on a topic like turn on and monitoring, or we have a team that focuses on our phishing product. And we try to have them aim at a set of metrics that sort of reflect something about the real world. So there's a belief you have about, like, I think in turn on and monitoring that if I can reduce the time to a device being connected and operational, that will yield higher customer success. Now that's a statement of belief. Like you can't 100% falsify that, but that is a metric I can transact on. So now my team's going to get to work and say, what can we do to move that metric? Okay, well, if we build a wizard, it might be able to speed that up. Okay, fair enough. So we're going to do that. We're going to try to move that metric. And the process of doing that does a couple things. So the first one is it gives you a way to kind of steer. You're steering around a metric. It gives you sort of a bit of a North Star, right? But the second thing is it builds a process if you do it right. And this is the downside. Like many people will say, well, you can't be too metrics focused. There is a way in which you can like overuse the metrics and forget that what you're really doing is you're having a conversation about belief, right? I believe that if I move this metric, the following thing will happen. I'm going to make things faster to onboard. My customers will be happier. Okay, fair enough. So move that metric, prove that you can make it go up and down, and then check how happy your customers are. Right. And that will become a cycle. And one of the things I really like about that DIB framework is it kind of does become a cycle of like, hey, we're going to make, and it really does, it uses the word belief and the word bet, right? I believe that if I do this, something's going to happen, right? I'm going to make a bet on it. I'm going to make some investment. We're going to do some projects, and then we're going to see if that works. The thing I think is so powerful about that is by saying, hey, it's a belief, I'm going to normalize the fact that most of the time we don't know what the hell we're doing. Let's be 100% clear. Like I don't care how much data you've got, how many customer interviews you've done. Most of the time we're like 70% on any idea. And the bet part is, hey, it might not work. And the power of that is I take away the fear of measuring something, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, there's a number. My boss is going to have me in their office and they're going to be showing me this number and it's going to be too low or too high or whatever. And if I could say, look, it's a bet, it's a gamble. Maybe we can do it, maybe we can't. It sort of gives people the psychological safety to be like, okay, yeah, we can actually really start steering.
But I think that you bring up a great point around failing quickly and allowing your team to feel safe to fail. So are there other ways, obviously by saying bet, right? That gives your team the space to say, I don't know if I'm totally right. Like I'm going off this feeling, and you're giving them the space if it doesn't go right to be like, that's okay. Like there's learnings, but are there other ways that you make your team feel safe to kind of fail and give them the space to experiment in that way?
It's a great question. And I think it'd be interesting if you found out if my team really felt that safe around me, but like, let's just go with that as a thesis, right? So one of the things that I think is really useful is to, when you're dealing with development teams, and this is a very counterintuitive thing, and everybody who joins my organization kind of freaks out about it, is that we don't tend to use deadlines. Right? Like I'm interested from an engineering team. I'm like, okay, what units of time is that measured in? Fine. Okay, great. Because it gives the team a little bit of flexibility. The second you put in like, and by December 2nd, this has to be true, a lot of the degrees of freedom that the team experiences and has go away. So that's one thing, is like, if you don't have to have really hard and fast deadlines, if a quarter deadline will work, like try that. The second thing is you actually have to live it. Right. So one of the things I do a lot of is cracking jokes and laughing. And when we have something that's a real train wreck, I always try to make the first thing that happens in the meeting is like, I'm going to say something dumb, or I'm going to laugh, because I'm just like, that's terrible. It's such a much better way to do this than be like, okay, well, we have an escalation now and the executives are going to have to get involved and all that kind of hootenanny. Right. The last thing is the last two things, I'm transparent when I screw up. Okay. And my organization, one of the things I'm blessed by at Expel is that we have a very transparent organization. So our CEO and our entire executive team will come out and be like, yep, screwed that up, right? Totally blew that call, right? Our bad. And the second thing is we built a culture of analysis and hot wash, right? And so there's a bunch of different ways to do it. But if you get any good operations book on doing a hot wash, a blameless hot wash, where you just sit down and be like, okay, what happened? In everything, even if it was a disaster, some stuff went well, some stuff went meh, and some stuff went badly. write all that down, walk through it, ask why, ask, hey, so what about this? What about this? What about this? And what you come out with 99% of the time is you will never find, or at least I have not, and I've been doing this for 25 years, is you'll never find someone who maliciously sabotaged your project, right? You will never find someone who through just pure idiocy screwed your project up. Like I've never worked in an environment where it was just, like people being absolutely dumb. It's always, hey, like it's humans doing human stuff with human things. And like we didn't 100% understand that. And that was harder than we thought. And that thing over there turned out to be the wrong, whatever. And by pulling all of that out and being like, okay, well, why? What do we do next time? What do we think about that? That sort of stuff. People actually get excited about the ability to get better. So that's a little bit around that psychological safety. But you got to practice it. The first time you come in and you're like, all right, who's responsible for this? Like it's over. Like you're gonna be in real rebuild mode for a while, right? On that.
And I think something you bring up is the natural curiosity, right? About, hey, we tried this out. Let's just look at what we can do better, right? And so it also allows people, and I'm guessing in your organization, this allows you to see people who can pivot quickly, right? And people who can kind of look at that. And so when you're hiring, you could say, hey, I'm looking for people who can pivot quickly, who are willing to make mistakes, because how can we grow and learn if we're not willing to make mistakes?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely true as a trait when you're interviewing. I mean, because you can have all the experience and all the skills you want, but when we think about traits, we like to look for things like problem solving and, the ability to a certain level of agility and things like this. Now, calling out a thing, right? One of the things I think is interesting and people spend a lot of time thinking about it now is the different problem solving types of people. Agility to me might not look like agility to you. So I think really well on my feet. It's a thing that I'm good at, right? Throw me a problem and we'll start whiteboarding and I'll bluff my way through it. Why not, right? There are plenty of people who don't think well on their feet, but that doesn't mean they're not agile. And so one of the other things about, say, leading a hot wash or dealing with a team when they're having issues is you got to kind of take into account, I might not want to show up and start asking everybody questions without letting them prep, which is why we actually in a hot wash use a document ahead of time. It allows people to get their thoughts down on paper and that kind of thing. It levels that playing field a little bit. But yeah, absolutely. You want people who are agile. You also want people who are just the sort of the natural curiosity thing. It's not a thing you can teach, but man, is it powerful if you get a couple people on a team who are like, why is that way? What if we did this instead? That kind of thing. That is a huge benefit. And the number of interesting solutions and things like this that have come out because of that, just tremendous.
So when you're hiring, what are other things that you're kind of looking for? Skill set, traits, what are things where you're like, this person will bring something to my team? And I guess a second piece of this is, how do you make sure you're hiring cohesively for a team?
So great questions. So there's a couple things I would call out is we break things down into skills, experience, and traits. So we'll talk about experience first, right? Experience is just I've been doing this for 25 years. I've done X, Y, and Z, a number of times, right? And so if you're hiring somebody to do your taxes or something like that, you want them to have experience doing taxes. That's a thing. And that's water under the hull. You can't fake it. You can't get around it. That's just time on task. The second one is skills, I can program in C, or I can write Python code, or I know a particular framework or something like this. I can use Acture. Those things you can teach people, okay? And in a certain amount of time, some number of months, you can usually take somebody and make them reasonably combat effective in whatever skills that you need, unless you're doing nuclear physics or something. And then traits are the thing that's really important, right? Because traits are really hard to teach. Those are things like curiosity. Right. Dedication, things like this. It's the things that show up when you're dealing with a problem or something like this. It's people's natural attitude towards something. Right. And so we tend to break down our jobs and we think about when we make a job role, we think about, okay, what does the actual job description look like? Okay. What do we need this person to do? And then take that and turn that into skills, experience, and traits and come up with a matrix and be how would we screen for that? And that usually is the part where I'll be honest with you. That's the number one place everybody screws up is they don't take a sort of a structured approach to, I've actually got a job description and I'm going to break that down into skills, experience, and traits. And then I'm going to think hard about how to screen for those. What they do is they're we'll just get some smart people in a room and have them ask some smart questions. Maybe we'll do a couple of riddles and then we'll hire somebody. That's a terrible way to interview, right? Because what you're going to do is you're going to hire a lot of people who are exactly like you. right? Which I gotta be honest, I would not want to work with an entire team of people like me, right? I think that would be terrible. And also, you're not going to end up seeing the actual stuff that you need to see, right? So that's the first part. The second part is you got to ask yourself the question about, when you're thinking about the superpowers on your team, right? This tends to be more like you've built your team and you're coaching them. I always think about it in terms of superpowers and super weaknesses, right? So I have some people who are amazing at they're incredibly analytical and they're super deep in their understanding of things and they can think in frameworks. But maybe their super weakness is they do not think on their feet well, right? So you're never going to walk into a room and start asking them questions. But if you play to their strength and obviate their weakness by doing everything over Slack, for instance, it's going to be amazing. So you got to think about your team makeup that way as who's going to, as you're making your next job description, given my super strengths and my super weaknesses, what else do I need to do and what else do I need to build? The last piece, and sorry, I'm going to go on and on, but the last piece I would say is, way too many people think you got to hire the person for the job, and that's the job they're going to do. Your organization is changing. Your product landscape is changing. Your customers are changing. Why the hell aren't the people on your team changing? So what you're doing is when you hire traits, that is actually like the slope on the line. That's like what the person's going to be in 2 or 3 years, right? I'm going to pay to send you to classes. We're going to make an investment in your learning stuff. You're going to get experience when you go. So you got to think about the fact that this person you're hiring is dynamic. They're an investment. They're going to be a person on your team. And so you can't just think about it like a point in time. You also got to sort of say, where are they in their arc of their career? Some of the best hires that we've had have come in and haven't had the skills exactly that we've needed. They roll in, they're like, yeah, I don't know that, I don't know that, I don't know that. Yeah, but you have an unbroken string of successes across a weird set of things, and you seem to be incredibly curious. Why don't we put you in a seat and see what happens? That kind of thing. That class of stuff has led to some really, really good stuff.
I think you also bring up a great point about the professional development, right? You have to also, not only do you have to hire these great people, but when you're retaining them, what are you doing to support their growth and their path? So you said, continued development or continued classes. What are other things that a leader can do to support their team in that growth?
Sure. So a couple of things. So first off, starting with at a structural level, I'm going to go back to actual job descriptions, right? So if I have a senior product manager, for instance, I should have a job description for a principal product manager. And I should be looking at that person either quarterly or twice a year or yearly and saying, what is the delta between your capabilities and the required capabilities of a principal? Now let's take a hard think every quarter about, okay, we need to have you work on this to get here and this to get here and this to get here. Let's figure out what projects you're going to work on that will give you an opportunity to really stretch on those things. That's management. That's good quality management, and everybody should have that, right? Everybody should have somebody in their organization who's thinking about, how do we make sure at the end of this quarter that, Susan is better than she was coming into the quarter, right? The second thing is at a corporate level, at a corporate ethos level, there's something that we do at Expel that I think is kind of unique, but I think it's it helps me with this. One of the reasons I think that people don't invest a lot in training and their staff is because they're afraid they're going to leave. Right. And in the era of the Great Resignation, man, isn't that terrifying, right? A lot of places they're well, we'll send you to class, but you got to sign a contract that says you won't leave for a year or whatever kind of silliness. At Expel, we look at it and we go our job as managers, right, in this case, is to prepare people for their next job, even if it's not at Expel. Right. So we think about not people leaving Expel, but people graduating. Right. I have somebody leaving one of my teams and I'm super jazzed because dude's going to go on to a good, the new opportunity is amazing. And we have done so much to prepare him for that they're going to be wow, people at Expel are monsters. That is part of what we're supposed to do. That's just part of being the sort of the professional human community. So sort of changing the way you think about people, going through and then graduating from your company is a really useful thing. The last thing is, I think we don't take nearly enough account of the kinds of things that we can learn from other people at our jobs. And so giving people on teams an opportunity to, is it pair programming or is it working with somebody on a particular thing or something like that? And as a manager, thinking about I know people's super strengths and super weaknesses, therefore I can pair them so they might learn from each other on certain things is a super duper useful thing. And again, not to go on and on. The last thing is an anti-pattern. So we have in our budget, we have $2,500 allocated for every single person to take a class, go to a conference, whatever. And I don't care what it is, right? So if you're a product manager and you come and I want to go to GopherCon, which is a Lang programming conference, cool. Like take some notes. Tell me how it is. I'm sure you'll have a great time, because that, maybe it sparks some interesting ideas or something like that, but that's professional development. You're interested in it. We're going to make sure to help with that. Now, I'm not sure I would send someone to a pottery class, right? Like that would be a little bit of a stretch for me. But within reason, I don't necessarily need every single thing that you do or learn to 100% reflect in your job, for me, for instance.
And I guess it could be, right, if you had a product that was related to pottery, you could send someone.
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think a piece of that you bring up that's really important is investing longer term, right? And you're talking about like the shift from the fear of, oh, this person's going to leave versus thinking it in the, okay, if someone gets better, I did my job as a manager. And also like, they're probably going to stay longer because they know that we're invested in them. And they understand that like, they don't need to sign a contract that we believe that they're going to stay around because we've supported them in what they want to pursue.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing is like if you're in a situation where people are phenomenally unhappy at your company or something like that, you need to take a look at the company, not the people, right? Something else is going on. So, trying to keep people, through whatever, walled garden kind of approach you're taking is a little bit weird versus like, we're going to try to make a place that's really amazing for people to work at, and they're going to learn new things and this sort of stuff. I don't like, if I go through, just speaking for myself, if I go through a quarter at my job and I feel like I haven't learned something new, I get kind of irritated, right? I'm just like, look, I'm going to get a certain number of go-arounds on this thing. Can we please, pick up the pace? Can we do something new? That kind of stuff. And so I think it's important to, recognize that's just part of like being, good to each other. Now there is, I'll sort of say, and a counterbalance is there are times, and I remember specifically I was talking to a young lady that we were, saying, hey, like, well, what about going and doing a particular class here? And she said, look, like I've been in grow mode for quite a while now. Okay. Right now, I'd like to go into flow mode for a little while and just I'm not down with the learn a bunch of stuff, right? I'm still digesting the last set of stuff. So we also have to know it's not always, graduate school, like not everybody all the time wants to do that, but like making sure that everybody's learning, getting a little bit better every quarter is just a huge thing.
I think that's just about understanding your team, right? In her case, it was just having a conversation, say, hey, we think this could be great for you. And she says, hey, I don't right now, I just don't have the brain space. And you're like, cool. We're just offering this, right? And she also knows that it's there if she does want to do that, right?
Exactly. And being open to the notion that later on, maybe sure, but totally, it absolutely makes sense, that kind of thing. I think the thing that too often we lose in sort of corporate America, and I think this happens, particularly at big companies that I've worked at and stuff like this, is like you just at a certain point, people just become widgets, and that when you lose that versus, hey, we think every single person here, from developers all the way through to the office support staff, should learn some new stuff and get some opportunities to grow professionally. So
on that note, we've been talking about people a lot. So I want to kind of shift and talk about people enabled by products. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's it's a hot button topic for me. So what we do at Expel is we're fundamentally about sort of security operations. So you can think like things in the world show up, and then we have analysts who have to react very quickly to them, and they could be dangerous, and there could be something malicious going on, stuff like this. So making a good call quickly is critically important. But that's not unique to us, right? There's plenty of places where you can go and you can say I'm in tech support, or I'm in customer success, or I'm designing a product or something where you exist in a decision space, and even if it's not time limited, making a good high quality decision is really important. And so one of the things that I think a lot about is how do you make a product that makes people more effective at doing the things that people should do? So one of the things we say a lot is that people are good at two things, and then everything else is largely automatable. They're good at judgment and relationships. Right. And so when I think about something like, let's use customer success for a second. If you're building a customer success software, you want to think about, okay, well, people are very expensive. Right. And, we've just talked about you have to make all sorts of investments in them, and they're cantankerous and they have bad days and all this sort of stuff. And so when you're going to have those people, you're going to involve them in something, you want to make those moments that they're in there absolutely the most valuable you possibly can. So how do you surround them? How do you envelop them in exactly the right set of stuff so that their judgment or their relationship building is perfect? So, perfect example in customer success, when you call up a customer success line, there are places that have invested in caller ID. So they're actually going to say, they'll say to me, Mr. Peters, so glad that you called. If they're even a little bit better, they have a database that tells whether or not I've called before, and they'll say, Mr. Peters, good to hear from you again. right? That's a little tiny human touch that immediately builds a certain amount of trust. Now, on a counter to that, imagine for a moment you call up customer success on something and they mispronounce your name or they screw up the name of your company or something like that. That builds distance in there. So our relationship is no longer, as good, right? Those are all things that we can think about when we're building a product. They're little tiny things, seemingly, but if you do them right, they add up to the person being ridiculously effective. And we've all seen this. We've all done this before. If you've ever used a product where you're like, somehow it's just intuitive and like my hands are just flying and oh my gosh, I'm like 10 times, like you at the end of it, you end up, just giddy with the power of it, that kind of thing. You're dealing with a product that like somebody has sat down and thought about like, how do certain classes of people work with it? And the converse is also true. If you've ever dealt with, and we all have, something that's like crufty and like the buttons don't quite work and it's just in the way, right? It's like the exact opposite. So I like to think a lot about that human computer interface. How do we sort of segment off, this is what a person does, this is what a person needs, that kind of thing.
And I think a piece of that, right, is fully understanding your customer and what they do and their workflows, right? And that allows you to build trust because maybe there's something that you think is good and your gut tells you as a product manager, oh, this would be really good. But if you're not able to like go in the weeds and actually interview and talk to those like people who are working or would be using your tool, you're never going to be able to build that trust because you don't actually understand their workflow.
Oh, yeah. No, it's hugely true. And this is one of the places where I think a combination of interviewing, but also observation. And again, I'll go back to metrics, right? So we have metrics embedded in our workbench. So we know how many times someone clicks on a particular button or where they go and this sort of stuff. There's tons of, if you're doing a web-based product, there's tons of different software that you can get that can literally do things like I can tell you how long their mouse dwelled, right? Like one product that I looked at a while back was really awesome because it could actually detect rage clicking, right? Like if somebody clicked multiple times in an accelerating pattern, it would like make a thing that said like you screwed this up, right? Which is really powerful. But getting that kind of information to understand what's really going on, because yes, we can all together fool ourselves. I will tell you, my background is in engineering. I know a ton of math. I love nothing more than to like make a screen that is just full of numbers and charts and just be like, here's the data. That is usually not great for people, right? So I have to know that my first impulse is almost always wrong in this respect, and then go out and like interview, trust the data, watch people use it, that kind of thing is hugely important. That's where if you're going to build a product from scratch, I think investing in people who are good at UX early in that process is hugely important. Finding good UX people is hard, I get it, but people who are good at user experience, or if you're designing something that's a tandem of a service and a product, people who are good at that service design, this is critical. There's a reason why Disneyland is the way Disneyland is, and it's because they have trained professionals who think hard about like, okay, so you're walking in the gate. Where is the soda machine? How far away is it? Am I tired when I get there? That kind of thing. You have to. The other thing is there is honestly no substitute for one other technique that I've seen used incredibly effectively is unbox your own product. Okay, do it periodically, do it regularly, and periodically, like we used to do this when we first started Expel, is we would just go grab some rando, like we would like be like, the CEO, we made him do it. We sat him down and we're like, tell him nothing, make him on board, right? Like go through the process and watch how screwed up it all gets, right? And while you're doing that, if you're good at it, what ends up happening is you end up in a situation where you learn a ton of stuff about it. I just, as a side story, I used to work at a company where we built boxes. We built like network hardware. And every time you built a new one, you would have to go to the VP of network products, his office, with the operations people and the customer support people. Like everyone would troop in there with one of these things in the actual shipping container, and you'd sit down and everyone shut up. And he would cut open the box and he would take out the product and he would plug it in and he would go through all of the setup and he would be calling out comments the whole time. So he'd be like, the cable is wrapped wrong and the product isn't like, I'm stuck on this and this is taking too long and that sort of stuff. It's incredibly humbling. Let's be 100% clear. It was super uncomfortable. I hated doing it. But it's also a really productive thing to think. I remember the first time that I tried this on a product, I sat down and I went through and there was I opened the box and there was a sheet with help and it said, in case of trouble, call this number. Okay, I'll bite. And I called the number and I got the receptionist at the company. And I was like, I'm having trouble installing my blah, blah, blah. Can you help me? And she had no idea what the hell was going on. And I'm like, yeah, this is a miss, right? You ship this to a customer and you've got an angry customer, right? It's like that class of stuff where getting in the mind of who's using your product, just hugely useful.
And I think to that, right, it's just like, that's something that like all product leaders should emphasize for their teams, right? Understand your customer, understand the customer journey. So on that note, what is one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring product leader?
Like not to be trite because you just said it, but like understanding your customer is huge, right? And if you're talking to your staff and they're saying, well, okay, we've heard this, right? One of the things to do is challenge that, and be like, okay, well, like, can I talk to that customer for a minute? Like go out, like as a product leader, every now and then go out and just talk to customers independently, see them use your product, that sort of thing, right? Like open-ended questions, that sort of stuff. There is like no substitute for knowing who's using your product and how they're using it, right? Like that would be my one piece of big advice. At the very beginning of a company, you can kind of YOLO it, and everybody does. But once you're one or two rounds of investment in, you better have a notion of who your customers are. Right?
So usually when you're one or two rounds of investment in, you're hiring. So on the note of hiring, what roles are you hiring for?
Oh, we are hiring. I mean, I will tell you, BT Dubs we're hiring. So we are hiring for product management. We are hiring in UX. We are hiring engineering, sales, like everything. We're growing like a weed. So like within my product organization, we are on target to hire 65 people this year.
Wow.
Yeah. So now the product organization is big. So like when I say that number, people are like, oh my, but it's like we're adding 60 people to an organization that's already like, close to 200, but all different roles. So if you expel.io, come on, we'd love to talk to you.
So where can people connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. So you can search for me there. And you can also come find me on expel.io, both places.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to Matt for joining us on today's episode of Product Chats. If you want more product management resources, feel free to head over to canny.io/blog, and we'll see you next time.